get you? Yes. Books that make you cry. Books that make you weep. Books that make you, like, tear up and get that little, like, tingly feeling behind the eyes and you're like, we're gonna cry, I'm gonna do it. Anytime a book makes me cry, I'm kind of like, 5 stars. 5 stars? Not always the case. Sometimes I cry and I go, why did I even do that? Was this book worth the tears? But a lot of times, if a book makes me cry, it's one of the faves. It's a great book, it's a great time. So today, I thought it'd be fun to give you some recommendations of books that made me cry, a little or a lot, that I think are worth reading. If you need to cry, if you need to let it all out, I do recommend reading these books. That being said, this is totally subjective. These are books that make me, a person who's very easy to make cry. Let's put that out there. I've always been a crier. These are books that just have made me cry. Will they make you cry? Who can say? I don't know who you are. I don't know your tastes in crying books. These might not even get you to shed one tear, and if not, take care of yourself. But these are books that have made me, like, just either tear up and get so emotional or just like sob, like convulsively put the book down and just like have to sob. And you know what? We need that. If you're not letting it out on a daily basis, these books can be good for that. And I do encourage you to cry. We're a big advocate of crying on this channel. And if you happen to read this book while you're in public and you start crying, baby. Go at it. Do you know how many times I've cried on the CTA red line? Baby. So anyway, let's get started. Books that I will start with first and then move into the next category. We'll start with books I've read in childhood. So these might not necessarily be like childhood books or children's books, but these are books I read as a kid that really affected me. A lot of them actually being children's lit, and then we'll move into adult lit. And also memoirs. Memoirs are part of this list because memoirs get really sad. A lot of these books I also don't have with me. A lot of them, if they are childhood books, they're at my childhood home in New Jersey. They're not with me. But the books that I do own, they are with me. They are here. I didn't put one very important book on. Wait, hold on. And it's somewhere. Okay, well, I won't pick it up now, but I remembered. I forgot a very crucial one. The first book that I remember, like, really connecting to and, like, really getting emotional over is The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. This was one of my favorite books as a kid. Fantastic book. I think even if you're an adult and you haven't read this, I highly recommend picking it up. It's about the bonds of brotherhood. It's about found family. It's about being there when you almost can't even be there for yourself, but you're there for those friends. And in that, like, crucial young adult childhood years where, like, your friends are everything to you and that circumstances can even just bring you even closer together. This is a beautiful book. This was written by a teenager. Crazy town. So basically this is about a group of boys. I think they're in, like, Dallas or Houston. They're in Texas, and it's in, like, the late 50s, early 60s, and they are kind of a loose gang. I wouldn't really call it a gang because that has implications. And it's just about them trying to make it through. Pony Boy Curtis is the main character, and it's just about him growing up with these boys on the streets and often getting into fights with the rich boys, which are called the Socs, like the Socs. And it just is a beautiful book, and it has a tragic death, like an absolutely tragic death. And I just remember being like, oh no, and crying. I also was that nerdy kid that read it on my own before we read it for school, and then when we read it for school, I had to kind of keep quiet because I was like, I know this is it's gonna make some boys cry. And it did. Speaking of making boys cry, a favorite activity, one that really made everybody cry in my 5th grade class was The Bridge to Terabithia by Katherine Patterson. Look, if you don't find this book sad, I really don't know what to tell you. Like, I do not know how to describe the emotions this book produces. So unbelievably sad. So this is about 2 children. They live in a rural community, and they start this kind of magical, mystical land called Terabithia. And the only way to get there is using this kind of rope swing, this rope to get across this creek, and they come up with this beautiful magical land for the 2 of them. Also something that involves just something unbelievably tragic and blindsides you so hard when you are 10 years old. You're like, and even if I, like, didn't have a frame of reference and read this now, I don't think I would expect that. Like, I really don't think I would see that coming. There's this scene where you're like, okay, kind of weird scene or like kind of a distraction, and then it boom hits you and you're like, what? Whoa. So much so that it like knocks the wind out of you and then you feel it. And I just remember being like, oh my God. We read it in 5th grade with our class. I don't know if we read that particular scene aloud. It might have been like we read it on our own and then came in to discuss it. But it just so happened that 5th grade was the year that the movie came out with Josh Hutcherson and Anna Sophia Robb. And we as a class went to go see it. And I remember being like, they're gonna cry. They're gonna cry. They're gonna pretend like they're not gonna cry, but they're gonna cry. And I remember sitting in the movie theater with my class, with a bunch of other 10-year-olds, and at the scene, I'm like looking over. They're all trying to keep it together, but they're all going like this, like the whole theater was just like wrecked. It's one of those stories. And if you know, you know. If you haven't read it, be careful. But I do recommend, even if you're an adult, read this book. And it was such a formative book to me, and I think about it still, all the time. All the time. Ah! No! Where the Red Fern Grows. Where the Red Fern Grows by Wilson Rawls. I'm still not ready to talk about this book. If you have any connection with an animal, especially a dog, I don't need to say anything else. I really don't need to say anything else. I was just talking about this with a friend. Like, there's something weird in this society where a person dies in something and you might be like, but an animal gets harmed in any single tiny way and you're like, no! I feel very strongly about that. This book will be rough. So this is a boy growing up in the Oklahoma territory. No, actually that's so funny. I used to confuse this area with Oklahoma as a kid, and I still, in my mind, confuse that. Isn't that weird? No, he lives in the Ozark Mountains, which are in Missouri. The Ozark Mountains is a physiogeographic region in the U.S. states of Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and the extreme southeastern corner of Kansas. Okay, so he may have been in Oklahoma. Long tangent. And he is gifted these 2 hounds. I don't know, does he buy them? I think he buys them with his own money. Doesn't matter. The point is, he wants dogs so badly. And he gets 2 of these hounds, who he names Little Dan, Big Dan, and Little Ann. And they have a bond. Again, if you have a dog, I would caution reading this. And my 7th grade teacher that made me read this, I'm still mad. Because I remember I put the book down and I just... It all came pouring out. And I remember I had to come down for dinner after I'd read it. And my mom was like, oh my God, what happened? Because you can tell when I've cried. I'm like very puffy and very red. And I was like, where the red fern grows. So sad. So sad. I should also mention this. I'm not really going to give any spoilers. This is really just a book recommendation video for you to ponder and to pick which one you think is going to make you cry. But I will not give any spoilers because that would be cruel. Spiders. E.B. White, I just have a theory. E.B. White was like, I love spiders and I want everyone to deeply care about spiders. So I'm going to write the most sympathetic, most lovely character spider that you have ever read. And then, I guess this is a spoiler, but if you don't know Charlotte's Web, yeah, I'm going to kill off this spider. I read that book as a child. I read that a little bit when I was a little younger. I'd say maybe I was like 8 or 9 when I read this book. And I remember being like, that is unfair. And my parents being like, well, I mean, honey, that's life. And being like, no, why? This beautiful, beautiful story, if you don't know it. Wilbur is a pig growing up on a farm. He gets saved. He's the runt of the litter and he's gonna get, but Fern, a little girl, saves him. And so Wilbur's like kind of fighting to live on this farm. And the other animals are like not super kindly to him. They're a little like, all right. But he befriends this beautiful spider named Charlotte who starts putting things in her web, like words in her web about him to like highlight him. She's like the ultimate hype man. She's a hype spider for this pig. And it's so beautiful. It's just the most beautiful story. And E.B. White really just like dropped the mic on this one and was like, I'm gonna write one of the best children's books of all time. But so sad. So absolutely devastating. And really, actually, I think formed my idea about spiders. Because I still love spiders. I save spiders. If I see them in a room, I pick them up and I bring them outside. Like, I still save spiders to this day. Because they're also good for the ecosystem. Don't kill your spiders. But also because I'm like, it's... And if you are sentimental, and if you have any feelings for creatures, big and small, Charlotte's Web will end you. It will end you. But it's a lovely story. Worth reading. Oh my gosh. This book, I don't know how many people know about this book. This was one that my mom had. It's a very old book. I believe it was written in the 40s or 50s. The 100 Dresses by Eleanor Estes. I don't know how many people know about this book. This is one of those books I read as a kid that I'm like, am I the only person in the universe that has read this? Because I'd bring it up with friends or I'd bring it up with people and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. So maybe it wasn't widely in print and we just like happened to have a copy, which my mom has some kind of like little like sixth sense for. Like she's somehow like, I think probably from working in publishing and working in children's publishing, she's like, I have this little edition of this book, and you're like, I have never seen this book ever again in my life. And that's how this book feels. It may have been popular back in the 40s, I don't know, but it's a very sad story. It's about this girl, I believe her name is Wanda, and she grows up in a family, she's very poor. Believe her parents are Polish immigrants. They're very poor. And when she goes to school, she tells all these girls, oh, I have 100 dresses at home. I have 100 dresses. And the girls are so mean to her. They're like, you wear the same dress every day. You wear the same dress every day. You're lying. And they tease her mercilessly. And it's just this, it's such a heartbreaking story because then when you find out what she means by the 100 dresses, and then the girls kind of regret the way they treated her, it's so heartbreaking. And like, there's something very feminine about it. There's something about learning to be a woman and how your femininity and how women can be mean to each other can be so cutting. And then there was something so beautiful in it. Like, it's, I don't know where you could find this book. I'm sure you could probably find it on the dark web. But this is just a book I read as a kid, and I still also think about this one a lot, and it just makes me, like, even to think about it, like, just gets me so sad. Then there's, The Book Thief. This is still, to this day, it's not on my favorites list, but if I had to make like a favorites of my childhood, favorites of young adulthood, this book is on it 1000%. If you haven't read The Book Thief, if you're looking me dead in the eyes right now and you haven't watched, the movie's okay. If you haven't read The Book Thief, turn this video off and go read it right now. This is one of those books that as soon as I read it, I was so young when I read it too, I was like, classic. That is classic. That is going to have a black spine, penguin classic, so good. I read this when I was 12 or 13. Excellent book. If you don't know this book, where you been? But basically this is about a little girl living in, I guess the beginnings and or like during the war in Nazi Germany. She lives in Germany. She goes to live with foster parents. And the foster parents may or may not be hiding a Jewish man in their house. And she befriends this other little boy, and they start to kind of steal books from people just oh so casually. It's just, it gets tragic. I mean, already you're like, it's a little girl in Nazi Germany, so how bad could it get? And then it just gets worse. But beautifully written and so almost experimental. It really pushed my mind in terms of how books could be written for a young audience, what a narrator could be. I remember being like, what the? So excellent and so tragic. So if you want a good cry, yes. This is a classic, but I would almost consider it like a children's classic or a young adult classic because I think people very young could read this. I read it when I was maybe 12 and it just ended me. If you have a sister, watch out. It's Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Classic story of the March sisters living in Massachusetts during, I almost said World War II. Girl, during the Civil War. Their father is away in the war and they're sort of left without him and just going on about their lives. And it's about sisterhood, it's about friendship, it's about love, and it's just one of the best stories ever. I absolutely loved this book. One sister who, again, if you don't know, but if you know, you know, who passes away. It's just so tragic. It's so tragic, it's so sad, and I remember just sitting there, just all of it coming out, all of it coming me. Excellent book. All right, now we move into adult books. Again, I guess a kid could read these, but these are what I've read as an adult, and what I think adults would enjoy. Pause for water. Replenishing my tears. The first is Just Kids by Patti Smith. This is on my list of favorites because this book is so excellent. Just Kids is a memoir by Patti Smith, songstress, poet, rock and roll star. This is about her in her early years getting started in New York City, so in like the 70s, maybe early 80s. And she lives with this man named Robert Mapplethorpe, who is like kind of her boyfriend, kind of just her friend, but really like a soulmate in the truest sense of the word. Like artistically, they were so linked. They inspired each other in all of their art. They were constantly together, influencing each other, just being there for one another in some of the hardest times of their life. They were literally living as like starving artists in the truest sense of the word in the 70s, back when also this city was this crazy boom of culture, but also this kind of scary place, and these two have each other. I read this on a train. It was a very long train to Vermont, and I remember reading it and being like, oh, this is great. I stayed at my friend's place at Vermont. I then read the book as I went home. It was like a quiet train. There wasn't that many people in there. I was sitting in this train sobbing by the end, because this is about losing your other half. Not necessarily in a romantic way either, because they start off kind of romantic, but then it becomes more platonic. But it's losing that person who you do feel like is another half to you. Of course, Patti Smith is a brilliant writer, because we know her as a songwriter, and so the book is so poetic, so vulnerable, so touching, and just, it's about that rawness of that relationship and the absence of it. I would warn you, if you have lost someone very close to you, this would be a hard one. This would be really difficult, but also might help. It might help. I don't know. But so unbelievably worth it. Like, worth every minute of the heartbreak. Every word is just so good. So that's Just Kids. The next is one I don't know if everyone's gonna cry at. This is like a very niche, specific pick, but I cannot describe to you how this made me feel. I cannot describe to you like the stages of grief I went through with this book. And if you've read this book, you might be like, what? It's The Mill and the Floss by George Eliot. I've only read 2 George Eliot books. Silas Marner, which I read earlier this year, which is very good, and The Mill and the Floss. And The Mill and the Floss rocked me. Brought up at Dorlcote Mill, Maggie Tulliver worships her brother Tom and is desperate to win the approval of her parents, but her passionate, wayward nature and her fierce intelligence bring her into constant conflict with her family. As she reaches adulthood, the clash between their expectations and her desires is painfully played out as she finds herself torn between her relationships with 3 very different men: her proud and stubborn brother, a close friend who is also the son of her family's worst enemy, and a charismatic but dangerous suitor. With its poignant portrayal of sibling relationships, The Mill and the Floss is considered George Eliot's most autobiographical novel. It is also considered her most powerful and moving. Most powerful and moving is correct. If you've read this book, you might be like, I don't get why this is so moving, but there's an ending to this book. It's a kind of a deus ex machina, which feels a little cheap. You're kind of like, okay, George Eliot, it seems like you wrote yourself into a hole and you wrote this tragic deus ex machina, which is where I first learned what a deus ex machina was, because I remember reading the ending and being like, that's it? Like, that's what you're giving us? That's it? That's it? And then looking up, like, Mill and the Floss ending and being like, a deus ex machina, like, what is this? It is so tragic and so sad, and I just sat there and, like, sobbed. And I was reading the book, and I don't think I really was aware of how attached I was getting to the characters. I was more attached than I thought I was, because I was reading it and I was like, we're liking this, and then the end came and I was like, why would you do that? Why would you do that? So if you want something very moving, you want something about siblings, you want something about how unfair life can get, The Mill and the Floss, because that just, it ended me. It really did end me. Ugh. Talk about books. This book, talk about how unfair life can get. This book is so unfair. And it's one that I actually have. It's Jud the Obscure by Thomas Hardy. The public basically bullied Thomas Hardy to never write another novel because they were so PO'd about this book. Whether they were horrified, like scandalized by it, or if they were just sad by it, who can say? But basically he was bullied to never write another novel because of this book. I've spoken about this in my yearly wrap-up for 2023 because I read this last year. This is about Jud. Jud is a stonecutter, so he's kind of a lower class, but he wants to be educated. He really wants to go to basically Thomas Hardy's version of Oxford. He really wants to going to the clergy or going into higher academia. He has like loftier goals for himself and something that involves a lot of philosophy and heady thinking. But he can't quite break into that world. And he also meets his cousin, Sue. And Sue is also an artist. She's an independent thinker. She's kind of a free woman. And the two of them just have this attraction to each other and love each other so greatly. But they're not really supposed to be together. And this has a part in it where I was like, that's so sad. It's so sad. And the ending, it's just one of those endings where Thomas Hardy's like, you're not going to get anything. You're not going to get a single ounce of happiness. These two people that you've come to really know and feel like real people, they feel like people you might know, yeah, you're not getting any of it. I cried and cried at the end of this book, and cried at also like a very particular part of this book. It was just so moving. And Thomas Hardy just like knows how to do that. He knows how to get you in. He knows how to really create a realistic, sympathetic character. And then he goes, yeah, but they can't live their dreams. They have big dreams, but they can't live their dreams. No. That, I can't allow that. And you're like... So this book will tear you up inside. I think if you're a classics person, a Hardy lover... I read Tess of the Dubervilles. I don't remember crying at Tess of the Dubervilles. I read that in high school. I may have been too young. Whereas now, as like an adult woman, I would be like, it's so unfair that I have to sob. So I don't know. But this one I cried. This one I have very recent memories of me crying to this book. So, pick it up with caution. What's making me cry? This one. This was a shock to me. Because I read his other books. I read The Sun Also Rises in high school. Hated it. I read Movable Feast in like 2021 and I actually really liked it, but it didn't make me cry. But this mother effer right here, A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway, made me unbelievably sob. Similarly to Mill and the Floss, I didn't realize how connected I was and how in touch with the characters I was, that when the ending came, I went, and just bawled. Just absolutely, like ugly sobbed at this book. It was ugly. I remember the exact spot on my couch I was sitting, and it just all came out like a torrent. For a man that I accused earlier of like, oh, he makes such flat characters, he makes such boring characters, his writing itself is so like lean and there's nothing in it. I didn't read this one. I had not read this one yet, and then I read this one. He is a sneaky little man, that little mustachioed Ernest. He's very sneaky because he... again, made me care for these characters. I didn't even realize I cared for them. And then the thing happens at the end and you're like... And also kind of like Mill and the Floss, he just kind of comes in with it like... and then ends the book. No, there's no room for closure. There's no room to like process it. It happens and then he's like, you're done. Bye. And I'm like, sir, that's rude. That's incredibly rude. This takes place in World War I. This is specifically on the Italian front. And it involves a young soldier and an English nurse and their relationship. So if you want a good cry, if you want something that is understated but beautiful, and gets you to care when you didn't think you'd care, read at your own caution though, because this was a lot. This was a lot for me. Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. This is about a woman living in Florida, and it's about the different relationships in her life. And the last relationship she has with this man, Tea Cake, and what happens between the two of them. I just know that I read it and was like, this is one of the saddest and like one of the most profound reading experiences of my life. Because I'm thinking about the scene, which I won't spoil, but I'm thinking about the scene and it's almost biblical in proportion and in scope and in the way Zora Neale Hurston wrote it. I remember like reading that scene and being so keyed in, and then everything that happened from it happened, and then I let it all out. Because talk about a book where I like cared so deeply for these characters. And the woman in the book had just gone through so much, and then she was with Tea Cake, and then it just a beautiful book. A really, really beautiful book. If you have not read Their Eyes Were Watching God, maybe you'll cry, maybe you won't, but I was so taken by that book and so moved that it just then, everything came out. And this book is due for a reread. I'm going to try to find it when I go home, because I do want to read this book again. Oh, this book. This was not a book that made me weep per se. This just made me like, it made my eyes tear up and like softly kind of cry because the ending was so gorgeous. It was so beautiful, so stunning that I was like, this was the perfect ending. And it is kind of sad, but poetic and beautiful, and I'm getting chills thinking about it. It's the ending to Watership Down by Richard Adams. I just remember reading this. I had just moved into this apartment. It was like the first book I was reading when I was moving. And so we had like nothing in the apartment, or like we did, but all our stuff was kind of scattered. And I just remember reading the end in like our brand new bedroom and it feeling kind of off because we weren't used to the room yet, and reading this ending and just being like, I don't talk about this book often, but I should talk about it more. How connected I got to this book, how much I feel for this book. It maybe should be in my favorites. It is up there. It's up there in terms of like almost at my favorites. This is a book about rabbits. Basically personified rabbits. It's about this leader of these rabbits named Hazel. They live in this warren, a rabbit warren, and his brother Fiver gets some kind of premonition. He's like, something is gonna happen, we gotta get the heck out of here. And Hazel's like, great, we will go with I believe you, I will take anybody who believes us, and we're gonna go try to find a new warren and start a new life. And so some follow them, and so it's about everything. Like, it is about humanity, but it's told through rabbits. Which is funny because when Richard Adams has been asked, like, come on, what is this book about? Like, what did you really mean when you wrote this book? He just wrote, this is just a story about rabbits. Like, I just used to tell my kids when we drove through the English countryside, I'd tell them stories about rabbits, and that's all this is. But I'm like, you sly little fox. I'm like, there's so much that this book is. Like, it's about civilization, it's about power struggles, it's about believing in something greater than yourself, about religion, about community. It is about humanity, but it's just funneled through rabbits. The rise and fall of civilizations. And it's a beautiful book. If you watch Lost, Sawyer is often seen reading this book, which I think is very interesting. If anyone's a Lost fan, let me know. Great book. And the ending, again, it was like a violin playing. Like a beautifully timed violin came in. Oh no, I'm reading it again. No, I can't. Oh, I can't. Read it. That's what rabbits will do to you. What rabbits will do to a girl. Anyway. I will never shut up about this book. I'm never gonna stop talking about Les Mis. If you're new here, welcome. Welcome to the Les Mis Stan account. Stay a while. Asseyez-vous. I read this last year. It became my obsession. It became my world. I lived in it. I was in the sewers of France. I was on the barricades. I was hanging out with Fantine. This is a book that will fully immerse you if you let it. If you really dedicate the time, this book will take you. I've known the story of Les Mis for a very long time. If you don't know, this is a very specific point in French history where it's sort of in between Napoleon and going back to the monarchy, and also the fight for democracy. And there's all these characters kind of milling in and about, and it's kind of about the downtrodden and the forgotten peoples of this time. The poor, the impoverished, the suffering. So I won't even get into I can't describe the plot, I will not. However, if you are interested, I recommend just listening to the music of the musical, which is what I grew up with and I loved. But I read the book for the first time last year. And I think I knew these characters already. I knew a lot of them very closely, but this obviously was getting really, really into those characters, getting into their minds, getting to know them more, almost as fleshed out people, where in the musical they can feel a little bit like stock characters or staged characters. This, I got to really know everybody. And the writing at the very end. We all know at this point, Jean Valjean passes away at the end. I hope that's not a super big spoiler. But I mean, this traces basically, like, a lot of his adult life. And I knew it's coming. It's no secret to me. I've seen the musical. I've listened to it a million times. I know that that's what happens. So in some case, I'm like, okay, I see it coming. But it still took me out. And the little tiny epilogue at the end where it describes his grave, and that his grave doesn't have any writing on it. It's just a simple marker that's been, and the writing has been washed away by time. And it just sits there. It got me. And I think it was also just like I had gotten through the whole book and like had done the whole thing that it just like, and I never have felt so empty and so whole at the same time after finishing a book that I have to, here, take it, do it. That end, I was toast. Oh God. You want a sad one? You want something really sad? If you don't cry at this book, I don't know what's going on with you. I don't know what's happening. Because I think you'd have to be so cold to not feel something stir in you when you read this book. I was just talking about this with a friend. It's Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. This essentially follows 3 kids, Kathy, Tommy, and Ruth, at a boarding school. And there's something funky about this boarding school, but you don't really know what's up. That's all I'm gonna say. And it's just about their lives as they're in this boarding school and then they leave the boarding school. Simple, right? Easy. Easy. It's just 3 kids. It's a little love triangle. What are you gonna do? No. Kazuo Ishiguro does such a fabulous job at instantly getting you to know these characters, like these characters, maybe don't like these characters, but fully signing on that these feel like real flesh and blood people. You're fully committed to them, and you are sympathetic to some of them, and you want them to succeed and to thrive and to grow. But as he's going, he's dropping little hints about the world of this book, he's dropping little hints about these characters, and you're like, starting to put it together, then you put it together, and then it's just, the tragedy just sinks in deep, and you're stuck, because then you're already hooked on the book, and then you're toast. He annihilates you with just unbelievable tragedy. I read this so long ago, and again, it's one of those books that I still think about often. The philosophical things in this book, the philosophical queries and ideas that this book brings up, the beauty of the writing, which has made me love Ishiguro's writing ever since. I love The Remains of the Day as well, and I've read An Artist of the Floating World, also great, but there's something very, very special about this book. And the movie with Keira Knightley, Andrew Garfield, Carey Mulligan, do you need anything else? What else could you want? So I highly, highly, highly recommend Never Let Me Go, especially if you need a good cry, because that will make you cry. If it doesn't make you cry, I don't know. A recent one that I've read, Know by Name by Chanel Miller. This is a bittersweet one. This made me cry out of just sheer frustration, out of sheer hatred of the systems we live in. All of the fears of being a woman have culminated in me reading this book, but also I had tears of joy, of being proud of this person who I don't even know. Chanel Miller doesn't know my name, but I am proud of her. And this book it's so important. Like, I hope that this book lasts above all else and is given to everyone. I think everyone should read this book. So moving. There were so many times I had to put this book down and was just like, oh. So this has every kind of cry you can kind of imagine. Tears of frustration, tears of sadness, tears of almost fear, tears for fears, tears of like hope. And I don't know if I've ever read a book where I'm like crying because I feel hopeful or crying because I feel immense satisfaction is not the word, feeling immense gratitude for the people in my own life and just the happiness knowing that she has the support she has. Like that, I don't know the last time a memoirist or a writer has like made me feel that kind of way for the subject of the book. If you are a memoir person, even if you're not a memoir person, I highly, highly, highly recommend. This is still one of my top books of the year. If you don't cry, I don't know. I really don't know. You will find society asking you for the happy ending, saying come back when you're better, when what you say can make us feel good, when you have something more uplifting, affirming. The ugliness was something I never asked for. It was dropped on me, and for a long time I worried it made me ugly too. But when I wrote the ugly and painful parts into a statement, an incredible thing happened. The world did not plug up its ears. It opened itself to me. So good. And the last is one that oh no, this is not the last. This is not the last. No. The next is one I don't think I've spoken about on this channel. Maybe I have. I should really just do a whole video about memoirs. This is Renoir My Father by Jean Renoir. Jean Renoir is known as a film director. He's a film guy. But his father was the Auguste Renoir, the Impressionist painter, known for a lot of his paintings of women, of young girls. A lot of his Impressionist paintings have people in them. They're very social and beautiful. He's one of my favorite Impressionist painters. So I picked this up because I was like, oh, this is his son. and this is about Renoir. Like, okay, I'll read it. Thinking I'll get some kind of like nice little vignettes about Renoir and about his life and what he was like as a dad. I didn't realize how moved I would be. I did not realize how intimately he was going to let us into his life and into his father's life. I learned pretty much everything I could learn about Renoir, about his very, like, humble origins. His first job was painting these kind of like decorative plates and decorative vases during the French monarchy. Things obviously back then weren't mass produced, so all of these things had to be hand painted, but people kind of liked buying similar things or kitschy things, so he was the person that would like paint a lot of these portraits on these things over and over and over and over again, which I thought was really interesting. Then of course he develops his own style, he becomes kind of an impressionist, but you get to know him as a human being. Like, you get to know him as his father and what he was like, how affectionate he was with his family and how much he loved his wife, what he was like as a family man. There's like a very particular story that I think about a lot, that Jean gets kind of like lost at a fair, or at like, he gets lost kind of in public, and then his parents find him later and they were panicked. And they were like, oh my gosh, we're so glad we found you, like you were lost. And just the thought of the artist Renoir like behaving in that kind of like paternal, scared parent way. There's so many things like that in this book where I was just like, oh, I'm really getting to know him as a person. So that, I mean, this is not a spoiler, Renoir at some point passes away, but Jean, speaking of that, I was like, no, I feel like I know someone who died. And the way Jean Renoir did, what else did he write? Like, he wrote this and it was so good. Brilliant. Brilliant. And I remember I was in a cafe with a friend, and when I was finishing this, it was just, they were like, are you good? I'm like, no, I'm not good. Renoir died. If you are looking for a memoir, if you're looking for a great book about fathers, if you have to heal some father trauma, maybe read this book, maybe don't read this book, but all in all, I do recommend it. It is excellent. And one I should probably talk a little bit more about, but this is so good. The Double Portrait of Father and Son is, in the words of art historian John Golding, not only the best account of Renoir, but also among the most beautiful and moving biographies we have, and I would certainly agree. The last book, which I couldn't find, it's somewhere in my apartment, but it is one of my favorite books ever. It is The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. I've spoken before, if you watch my favorites video, which I do recommend. If you've never seen my videos before, I recommend watching that one because it gives you just a good sense of what I consider the creme de la creme, the best. This is one of my favorite books of all time. I have read this twice, which rereads are rare for me, so that should tell you something. And this book just completely destroyed me. Destroyed me and then rebuilt me, especially on the second read. This is about these two twins living in India, and their cousin, who's been living in England, comes to visit them. And it's about a summer that she spends with them. And it's also about this man named Velutha, who comes and helps out the family. He does little odd jobs for them. He likes building the children toys, but he's technically part of the untouchable cast, so technically the family is not really supposed to have any association with him, but he works his way into their lives. The children love him. Their mother loves him. There is no other book that I think just completely just upended me, because again, I could almost see the tragedy from far away. Like, I could see that this was not going to end well, especially for how strict the caste system, I mean, still is in India, but especially at this time in the 60s, 70s, and how oppressive it is. I just knew it was not going to end well, but I still, again, got so attached and so connected that it upended me. And Arundhati Roy's beautiful magical realism writing in this just added that extra, almost mythical layer to it that just made it so unbelievably beautiful and so undeniable, but so tragic. This book is not for the weak of heart. I know some people don't love this book. I think the writing style may be a hit or miss for some people, but if you do love magical realism, if you do love stories told through the eyes of a child, in which case things can be a little bit warped or maybe a little bit, not unreliable, but just through younger eyes, so that gives it a whole other film on top of it. If you like stories of injustice, you like stories about family, you like stories about love, knowing no bounds and knowing no color, you'll love this book. You will love this book. And it just is one of those books that the second time around, I'm like, we know what happens, and I still ugly sobbed. Which we love on this channel. Again, if your book makes me ugly sob, you're getting at least a 4-star. You're getting 4 stars just to get me to feel that kind of emotion. Not that I don't on the daily. I'm someone who feels so much that I have to like watch myself. But if a book can get me to do that, if just reading words on the page gets me to do that, oh my god, you've done something fantastic with your art. You may be asking yourself, Catherine, where is the TikTok famous, the huge famous crying book, A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara? You're wondering where that is, I know. I haven't read that book yet. I know that this book is almost controversial for how sad it is. Some people have called it like emotional torture. I know. I haven't read it yet. I'm planning to read it later this year. I think probably around November, December. It's one of my big books for the year. I plan on reading a bunch of like large books, one of which I'm in right now, War and Peace. And so right now I'm like, I can't do War and Peace and do A Little Life at the same time. So A Little Life I'm going to read a little later in the year. I will report back to you if that makes me cry as much as everybody is claiming it is. Being someone who does cry a lot, I'm assuming it is going to make me cry. But also there's been so much expectation to cry and so much hyped up around that book and making you cry that I'm like, maybe it won't. Like maybe I will be the only one that's like, this didn't get me to feel anything. So I'm interested. I'm interested to see. It's not hard to make me cry, but I just feel like there's so much hype over this book about how emotional it is that I'm like, what if it just doesn't? Like, what if I built myself up and it's nothing? So that's not on this list because I can't tell you if it made me cry or not, but I'll let you know. But yeah, those are my book recommendations for books that make you cry. I'm also a big sad music lover. I just love like wallowing in that feeling if I am feeling it and then moving on and doing something else that isn't sad. But sad books, sad music, bring it on. We love it. So what are your favorite sad books? Let me know. I am always in the mood for a good cry. I would love to find a book that makes me feel the way these books have made me feel. So please let me know in the comments what books make you emotional, make you weep. Yeah, but thank you so much. If you're new here, I encourage you to like, to comment, to subscribe, to do whatever you want to do. If you are a current subscriber, thank you so much for coming back, and I'll see you all in the next one. Gonna go cry. Bye!